Jimmie Terrell Smith was released from prison in September of 2005 after he completed 10 years of his prison sentence. He was given 3 years of parole with very strict requirements. He was told that he could not get into any trouble, he could not commit any new crimes. He was told that he had to report any and all arrests that were made regarding him. He was told that he had to go to court mandated mental health assessments, attend anger management programs, and just anything unusual that occurred in his life. He had to tell his parole officer. He was supposed to check in and let them know what was going on in his life so that they can help him and keep him, guiding him on the right track. From 2005 until 2009, he stayed on the loose, despite being arrested 6 times, being convicted twice of beating a woman, marijuana charges, and also failing to report other additional arrests and convictions. He stayed on his parole. Despite all of these violations, he remained on his parole with non-compliance. In May of 2009, he was finally taken off the streets, only because he kidnapped and raped. Why was he not violated is one question. The second question is, did the judicial system fail these victims? Or was it that no one cared because of the location, the demographics that these victims were located in? Was that part of why this wasn't an urgent need to get him off the streets? This case comes out of the state of Illinois. Illinois is located in the Midwestern region of the United States. Illinois is known for great pizza, in particular, delicious deep dish pizza. Good people, I'm going to tell you what it is, and that's what's happening. A psychopath is a person that's born with a neurological disorder. It's a brain disorder. This is what researchers have theorized. They said that this is something that a person is born with. They don't have the same emotion reactions that a normal functioning person would have because of this disorder. Now, a psychopath can be charming, very intelligent. The thing about them is they don't care about consequences. They act out, they don't think first. They'll go commit a crime for a few dollars and they don't care about going to prison. That's just what comes along with the crime. And they don't care about future consequences. These people can be very violent and they will dispose of you if you get in their way or if you cause them problems. Some of the well-known psychopaths that we know about are Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, and Jack the Ripper. A psychopath is always a narcissist, but a narcissist may not necessarily be a psychopath. Now, a sociopath is a person that they say develops into that person based on the upbringing, childhood experiences, and sometimes even as an adult, traumatic experiences, domestic abuse, being forced into violent situations. Those things can trigger sometimes a sociopath. Now, a lot of theories out there believe that children under the age of 18 normally start showing symptoms. These behaviors start sometimes as early as the age of 2, and they continue to progress and, become more obvious, and eventually they start acting out. They start skipping school. They don't care about truancy. They don't care about the rules. They push back. They don't want to listen. They're unruly sometimes. They can be violent towards other children and animals. They can start fires. They steal. They don't care. And these are normally very, very early symptoms of a sociopath, but They won't diagnose them until they're 18 because they want to make sure that these are just not behavior issues. Just like a psychopath, a sociopath will hurt you. They will dispose of you if you get in their way or cause them problems, and they have no remorse about it. Jimmy Smith was conceived by teenage parents. His mother was 14 when she got pregnant, and she was 15 years old when she gave birth. A teenage mother. She didn't want a baby, and she didn't know how to handle him. His father was never around, so she was doing this on her own. Eventually, she just gave him to his grandmother. She ended up with a drug addiction, and she just abandoned him. When he was a child, he was locked up constantly for stealing cars and other crimes that he committed. He was diagnosed with having a learning disability. He was a special needs kid. He had special education classes, and he had no help at home. His grandmother was an elderly woman, and she couldn't handle him. Now, Smith claimed that he had a child. He says that he's a father. Although there is no proof of it, this is his claim. He was never able to hold a job. He never had training. He never completed any school. He dropped out. And he claimed that over the years growing up, he had a numerous amount of head injuries that caused him to have issues. Smith was released from prison in September of 2005 after he had served 10 years for attempted murder. Now, he was given parole, and he was supposed to stay on parole for 3 years and check in with his parole agent and a number of other things he was supposed to do to make sure that he was in compliance, in which he did none of those things. He didn't have any place to go. His father, who was also an ex convict, 51-year-old Jimmie Lee Hawkins at the time, he had a friend, an old friend, and he asked her if he can move into one of her apartments in her building, and she said yes. So she put him and Jimmie on the top floor because she had a teenage daughter that was 15 years old, Yasmin Akri, and she didn't want him anywhere near her teenage daughter. So she wanted to keep them separated, but she allowed him to move in her building, and she knew he had a violent past. Smith would live in the apartment with his father for several months before he moved on. But during that time, he would go down the street and he'd sell drugs. He would boast to his associates about carrying a gun, and they knew that he had a gun. And he also committed other crimes. He was picked up, the police busted him. They would put him in jail, and then they would let him go. In September of 2006, Smith was picked up by authorities. A young lady had came forward. She was 17 years old, and she told police that Smith broke into her apartment, held her by gunpoint, and raped her twice. She says it was not consensual, that he brutally raped her. Smith's version was that she consented to it. How can you be consensual at 17 and at the time he was 39? Authorities processed the rape kit, but because of a backlog, they released him pending results. Those results did not come back until March of 2010. During this time, Smith continued his rampage of committing horrible crimes against individuals, with many cases where he was arrested. He was arrested a total of 6 times in between the time he was put on parole and then picked up in 2009. In another case, Smith was accused of raping a 20-year-old. Now, she was the daughter of his girlfriend. She claims that he choked her, he punched her, and he raped her, and she lived on the south side of Chicago. Smith claims once again that it was consensual. He produced a cell phone showing her and claiming that the rape was consensual. Prosecutors released him because the attorney couldn't decide, the state's attorney could not decide whether or not it was consensual. So in the delay with him trying to ponder whether or not it was consensual or rape, they released him. They let him go. The same month that they let him go, several weeks later, he went back for battery. He went back to jail for battery. He punched the lady in the face. They held him, and he was released on October 28th. Within hours of being released from jail, Smith went to the south side of Chicago in the Inglewood neighborhood to his ex-girlfriend's apartment. He broke in and he held her and her family by gunpoint for 6 days. He held them hostage. During that time, he tied up his girlfriend with an extension cord. He tortured her. He beat her. He did all types of things to her. He terrorized that family for 6 days. When she got away, she went to authorities and she reported what happened. She told them everything that happened during those 6 days. And she also went to court and she asked for an emergency order of protection. She explained in graphic details all the things that they had endured during that time. They picked Smith up, and for whatever reasons, prosecutors decided not to prosecute him. Once again, he was released. So for whatever reason, the ex-girlfriend decided to give him another chance. She forgave him and gave him another chance. She allowed him back into her home, and they got back together. On May of 2009, Smith kidnapped his girlfriend's 3 daughters along with a family friend who had been visiting at night. There were 2 14-year-olds, a 21 and a 22-year-old. One was the rape victim from 2008 who was 20 years old at the time. He took those young ladies to an abandoned garage in Harvey, Illinois. It's a suburb outside of Chicago. He held them at gunpoint and he raped them one by one. He inserted objects inside of them. He choked them and he even smothered a couple of them until they passed out. He beat them, punching them in the face repeatedly. He had a pit bull that he allowed to attack them. He would yell attack and let the dog just viciously attack the young ladies. Smith also used psychological torture on these young ladies. He took his gun and he emptied out all the bullets except for one. And he spent that barrel and then he would point it at the head of each young lady and he would pull the trigger. The young ladies will later tell authorities that as he continued to play Russian roulette and allowed his dog to attack them, they were tied up with ropes and tape, and they couldn't get away. They couldn't defend themselves, and they couldn't fight off the dog. After several days of torturing those young ladies, he left them. He abandoned them. He left them for dead. They were tied and gagged, and they were in an abandoned garage, and his hope was that no one would find them. No one would find them, at least when they were still alive. That was what he hoped for. One of the young ladies was able to chew through the rope and free herself. And when she did, she freed the other 3. And when they escaped, they went to authorities and told them everything that happened. He was picked up 3 days later, and he was placed in a Cook County jail in Chicago. Smith was still being held in the maximum security division at the Cook County Jail in Chicago. On December 11, 2014, Smith attacked his public defender. After they had met regarding Smith's trial, Smith was angry because he had been sitting in Cook County Jail for 5 years. Smith had been previously found with contraband, so authorities were trying to prevent that. And they cuffed him in the front for a special type of cuffing to prevent that. So he took advantage of that, having those cuffs on his wrist and being accessible for him. He struck the attorney on the back of the head and the neck area, and he knocked him unconscious. The attorney had to be taken to the hospital and treated for his injuries. The guards were able to quickly subdue Smith and get the situation under control. Authorities will later come in and interview Smith. While Smith was in jail awaiting his trial for the rape of the 4 young ladies, authorities went and questioned him about a missing teenager. The teenager's name was Yasmin Akri. Smith told authorities that he knew exactly what happened to Yasmin. He says that He wasn't going to tell them, though, because if he told them, it would be like putting his neck in a noose. He went on to tell the investigator that since he had been released in 2005, that he had committed 3 murders, that there were 3 unsolved murders that were directly linked to him. Smith told investigators with no emotion that taking a person's life was the easiest thing in the world. In March of 2015, Smith was charged with trying to hire a hitman to kill the judge and the prosecutor in his rape trial. He went on to hire, unbeknownst to him, an undercover sheriff as a hitman. He propositioned the sheriff $5,000 to carry out the 2 hits. Smith connected with another inmate in the alleged plot against the prosecutor and the judge. The inmate was the person that introduced him to the so-called hitman, who in actuality was an undercover sheriff. Smith went on to have multiple conversations with him that were recorded about how he wanted the hit carried out. When they searched his cell, he had the attorney's home address. In 2016, Smith pled guilty to the rapes and kidnappings of the 4 young ladies from Inglewood. In 2019, he was convicted of also trying to hire a hitman to kill the judge and the prosecutor. When the evidence was unfolded, Smith realized that the inmate that he thought was his buddy that introduced him to the hitman, who in actuality was a sheriff, was in on the entire plot. Smith claimed that the inmate had a 45-year stint, and because of that, he concocted the whole story in order to get good time and get favor from the court system. Smith testified that the inmate was making up the story and that none of it was credible, that the prosecutors had 4 recordings of him actually trying to make arrangements in order to carry out the hits. And when he heard that, he realized that he was busted. But he still continued to say that it was all a hoax and it was all a big joke and that it was all in the name of his friend that was an inmate getting his time reduced, because he know himself he didn't have a chance on getting out with a 110-year sentence. Jimmie Terrell Smith is currently serving his 110-year sentence for the kidnappings and rapes of the 4 young ladies from Inglewood. The DNA test for the first young lady that was raped came back positive. It was Smith that committed that first rape. So in actuality, even though he was tried for 4 rapes, he had 5 proven rapes that the prosecutors knew about. As of today's date, he has not given police any additional information about the 3 murders he claims that are unsolved, and also about the young lady, the 15-year-old teenager, Yasmin Akri. He was able to persuade a woman to be with him after he committed heinous crimes against her and her children. She took him back and she gave him another chance. Did she give him another chance because she loved him? Or did she give him another chance because she feared him? You guys leave a comment down below and tell me what you think about this case. Be aware, be safe. God bless you. Love you.